up.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoy the next hour or so. We're going to be talking about these terrific books written by Stuart Turton and published by El Ático de los Libros in Spanish and Bloomsbury in English as well. Just before I talk about the books and we start talking with Stuart, I just want to thank you for flying down to Barcelona.
Oh, no.
Thank you for sorting your agenda and things like that. We're aware that you have a festival in your hometown.
No, it's okay. You're aware that I live in the UK like you as well, so coming to Barcelona is not a hardship.
It's not. Depends on the planes and the flights. It's sometimes tricky. And secondly, but probably even more important than the previous one, a couple of days ago it was announced that The Devil and the Dark Water now has sold more than 100,000 copies in English in just a year. So congratulations.
Thank you very much, yeah.
That's a great milestone, I think.
Yeah, it's really strange because you don't know when you're in the middle of a book whether you're writing utter crap. And you still don't know when you come out the other side because it's very hard to get perspective on a book that you wrote. It's like hearing your own voice, I think, sometimes. And everyone thinks their own voice is weird. That's the way I feel about my books. I read someone else's book and I'm like, oh, my book is awful. This other book's great. So when you sold 100,000 copies, you're like, well, there's 100,000 people who seem to think it's okay. Like, oh, they hated it. Who knows? Yeah.
And actually, it's a great milestone, considering that in this year, bookshops have been closed in England for 6 months, 5 months. So it's even a greater milestone. Yeah,
it was really strange. It came out when it launched when the bookshops were shut, which didn't feel like a great strategy from Bloomsbury's part, but it's been noticeable. And my only way of measuring this truly is through Twitter and how many people come and talk to you on Twitter and how many people mention it on Twitter. And I've noticed that suddenly the uptick, so after the pandemic's beginning to calm down, people are finding the book now. It's a much longer process than it was for Seven Deaths, where just immediately everyone seemed to find that book and read it. And this one, it's just taken a little bit longer. Yeah.
Knowing that you have sold that many books, is now bigger the pressure or the pleasure for the following book?
I'm really lucky that I don't write the same sort of book. So Seven Deaths is completely different to Devil. The book I'm writing currently is completely different to Devil again. So they're all going to fail or succeed on their own merits, hopefully, and at least with each book I feel like I took a swing. I tried to do something really different and strange and odd, and if that's working, that's great. And if it didn't work, that's okay. At least I failed doing what I wanted to be doing.
Yeah. So the two books, for those that haven't read them, are, as I said before, terrific books, which are a hybrid of historical, mystery, fantasy, let's say. There are these three genres all together in the same story. What makes this genre so special for you? What attracts you of these same genres?
It's a funny thing. I don't notice that I'm doing it. I just tell stories. So I think of a story that I want to tell, and then I just tell that story. And when it's finished, it seems to cross all these different genres. But I don't know how I would do it. I have absolutely no idea how other authors tell their stories without crossing genres or leaning into taking a bit of sci-fi, taking a bit of fantasy, taking a bit of horror, taking crime. I just can't do that. It's not in my skill set just to write a pure crime book or a pure horror book or a pure fantasy book. I need to be able to dip into all these different things. So I honestly, it's strange that when I came out with Seven Deaths, I'd never heard the term cross-genre. No one had never ever heard of it. And then when this came out, everyone's like, it's a cross-genre novel. And I'm like, that is simultaneously the most useless description I've ever heard and the best. It doesn't tell you a thing about what's happening in the novel, but then I don't know how else you would describe one of these novels.
Yeah. And the Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle won the Costa Award for the best first novel, while The Devil and the Dark Water has been recently shortlisted for the HWA Award, which is the Historical Writers Association.
Yeah.
But then these books are also read by science fiction and fantasy readers, which is a great combination of all this. Talking about the fantasy side of it, how much are you into science fiction and fantasy genre?
Not very much. This is probably, I'm going to get booed out of this festival, aren't I? It's very strange. I am trying to read more science fiction, particularly at the moment. I like making a conscious effort to do it. It's not because at any point in my history I decided I didn't like those genres. I just never read them. It's one of those things. It's just like, it's like a vegetable that I've never tried. Like I never got there. So I'm making a conscious effort now to read more sci-fi in particular. Because a lot of the TV that I'm loving is science fiction, so I want to go back to that source material and those books and things and read those. That wasn't me. Whatever that wasn't me. But yeah, so I'm not that familiar with it. I think if it creeps into my books and creeps into my work, it's coming in through, I think, television. I think that would be the influence for me. Because there's a lot of science fiction on television that I enjoy.
Yeah, it seems there is now a time. It's the best time ever for science fiction and fantasy in terms of special effects.
Yeah, because people have got the budgets to hurl at it, right? So like a lot of those shows now have got tons of money behind them. So I've watched The Expanse. I don't know what that is but I've been watching that and I'm completely head over heels in love with that. You could not have made that show a decade ago, even probably 8-9 years ago, you couldn't have made that show because it's so effects heavy. And it would have cost an absolute fortune. But now you've got streamers who are willing to hurl money at things. God bless them. God bless them.
Yeah. Your English publisher says that your novels are high-concept mystery novels. I've been checking what high-concept mystery novels mean.
Yeah, could you tell me?
Yeah.
I'd love to know.
Well, it seems there are various meanings.
Yeah.
And one of those is that the books can easily be pitched in just a few sentences.
Right. It doesn't mean that I was high when I wrote them, which would be a more...
How can we pitch these books for someone who don't know about you?
Seven Deaths was an easy... Believe it or not, Seven Deaths is an easy pitch. Seven Deaths is an Agatha Christie murder mystery in a Groundhog Day loop with body swapping. Easy. So when I went to my agent, that's what I went with. I was like, when I first went out on submission, that's how I pitched it to him. That's how he pitched it to the publisher. That's how it got sold, basically. That was dead easy. Once you've written your first book and sold it, you don't ever have to do that again because they give you a multi-book deal. So you never have to think about the pitch for your second book. So when I was doing the interviews for Devil, and somebody was like, could you tell our readers, our audience, what the book is in like 3 lines? I was there for like 7 days, just kept talking about it, rambling. I think what I've come up with is it's a Sherlock Holmes-esque murder mystery on a haunted boat in 1634. That's what I've come up with. And again, it feels like that's the tiniest slither of what the book is. There's sort of romance in there and just seafaring and daring do. And it's just, I think, hopefully it's really fun. Like it was almost every book I write is a reaction to the last book. Seven Deaths is this metronomical piece of clockwork. Everything interlinks and just, clicks into place. All the characters are horrible on purpose. And The Devil is much more swashbuckling adventure, but with a bigger cast of characters who are much nicer and who I hope you want to spend time with. So they're almost like 2 different takes on what a murder mystery can be. And then, as I say, my third novel, I'm going to do something else again. Mm-hmm.
So you've mentioned Agatha Christie.
Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go first with Agatha Christie, because I remember when we talked like a couple of years ago, and in several interviews I've read, you always mention Agatha Christie as the great influence on your work. When did the engagement start?
I wish I was engaged to Agatha Christie. That'd be wonderful. It started when I was 8. My next-door neighbour would bring around stacks of Agatha Christie books to our house. She used to buy them at car boot sales. And there would always be 10 or 12 in a pile. And I would just read them voraciously through the course of a week. And I read them about the same ages. I read them between about 8 and 10, 8 and 12, something like that. And I read them all, every Agatha Christie novel back to back for 3 or 4 years. You can imagine what that does to a little brain. You can imagine how reading about wealthy people killing other wealthy people changes you. Especially for me, because I was from a working class town, like a fairly poor family in a working class town. It's brilliant to hear about rich people killing other rich people. I loved that. That was amazing. So my brain, I think a little bit of my brain even now thinks that that is a proper story. That's the way a story should be structured. That you should have all the clues and you should have all the suspects and it should all be fair, and that the reader should be able to guess who did it. They should have that opportunity. So that's when that started. And then when I finished all the Agatha Christie's, I segued onto Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, and I discovered Sherlock Holmes. I don't know if anyone knows this. Sherlock Holmes is a dick. Like, he's a tool. He's an awful character. And I think I hated Sherlock Holmes as much as I loved Poirot and Marple. I absolutely hate the character of Holmes. And I think when I was writing Devil, it was almost a reaction against it in the way that Seven Deaths was me embracing Christie. Devil was me reacting against Sherlock Holmes and trying to fix the things that I disliked about that character.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Agatha Christie would like your books?
But she's dead. I mean, if she did, I think she'd be more happy that she'd been resurrected. I think that's what she'd be delighted about. I'm alive! Oh, there's some books. Probably in that order. I don't know. I think she would have preferred the more... I think she would have thought there was too much frippery. I think she would have thought there was too much... because I don't think Agatha Christie would have been aware of what had happened to the genre in the intervening time, right? So these Golden Age mysteries, for me, when I was writing one, it didn't feel like I could write a pure Golden Age mystery. They've been done. There's tons of them. She wrote 95% of them herself. If you want to add something to that genre, I think what you need to add is other genres. I think you need to sort of make it a little bit more complex. And I don't think she would have held with that. I don't think that would have been for Christie. But hopefully she would have liked the plot at the centre, the bit that was kind of hers and that was a homage to her. Hopefully she would have liked that, because I worked really hard to make sure that the murder mystery at the heart of Seven Deaths, if you took that out, it would still feel like an Agatha Christie mystery. If you took everything else away, that would hold together like a classic Poirot mystery. And it was the same with Devil. Although I hate Sherlock Holmes, the deductive method that he uses, that Conan Doyle used, all the other little bits and bobs around it, I tried to make sure I honour those and use them and then add my own little spin to them. So hopefully those stories at their heart are very classic to those authors and they would like them. I just don't think they'd like the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. Continue talking about Christie and Conan Doyle. It seems that there is a historical link between fantasy and mystery, in a way. Do you see that as well?
Not for me. There's two things going on here. One, the two books I've written, there's fantastical elements to them, because I want my mystery books to be filled with mysteries. Not the only mystery is who killed who and why. They're great mysteries. I like the mysteries of what the hell is going on. Why is any of this happening? Not just the murder, everything around it. I want the mysteries to pile upon mysteries. So fantasy does that for you very, very well. Within the realms of fantasy, you can create worlds. Like, fantasy writers tend to create worlds a lot more than crime writers do, and create backstories and fantastical wars and all this sort of stuff that happens, worlds beyond. So I borrow that from fantasy and then I layer it on the top of my mystery novels. So I think they've got that in common. But that wasn't what I initially set out to do. What I initially set out to do was I wanted to write a Agatha Christie novel that was a bit more complex, that had the Groundhog Day in the time. I had very specific influences. So that's why that one got written the way it did. And then Devil got written because I came across a real-life story that inspired it while I was travelling. And the idea stayed with me. And then the historical setting I took because that was part of the original story. And the fantasy, it's interesting because for historical fiction, it's so far in the past that a lot of it feels like fantasy. A lot of it feels like something that somebody made up, the superstition, the occult, the charms that people used. All of this feels very fantastical, but it wasn't. It's rooted in our history, and alarmingly, a lot of it seems to be coming back.
Devil and the Dark Water, well, we are going to be jumping between both books all the time. But Devil and the Dark Water is more, it has much more historical part than Seven Deaths, probably. We follow this damped boat in the 17th century going from Indonesia to Amsterdam, if I'm not wrong. And there's a lot of sailing terminology, and there's a lot of things happening in the high seas. How hard was for you? How much investigation took you to know about this terminology and to create this world in high seas?
Quite a lot, actually, because I don't know anything about seafaring at all. I was really lucky that Devil in the Dark Water is based on a real-life incident called the Wreck of the Batavia, which happened in 1629. It was wrecked off the coast of Australia. Sorry, there's an amazing story behind this that I'm trying to get to the heart to, but not spend all day talking about. So basically, the ship gets wrecked in 1629. The captain and a few senior officers take off to get help. Now, you've got to remember, this is 1629. There's no GPS. There's no modern maps. They have celestial navigation and a few other tools, but they don't really know where they are. So they've got to get themselves back in a rescue boat, in a small rescue boat. They've got to get themselves back to Jakarta, which is where they start off from. And they don't know where they're going. So they disappear for 2 months, and they leave the survivors in the hands of the senior merchant. And it turns out the senior merchant is possibly history's first recorded sociopath. So while they were away, he butchered about 120 of the 300 survivors. And when they got back, they just found a bloodbath on these islands. That was the kind of that was the core inciting incident of what this book came from. And now, telling that story, I've completely forgotten what the question is. What was the question again?
It was about all this sailing terminology and...
Sailing terminology, yes! So I had that as the basis. So what that gave me was it gave me period, and it gave me a very specific area to research. So that ship, the Batavia that got wrecked, the real-life ship, they've rebuilt it in the Netherlands because they're wonderful. And they rebuilt it using the original construction techniques, and now it's a floating museum. So before the pandemic, I went out there and I spent 3 days on that boat, just crawling around and talking to the volunteers and asking every question I could. Because this boat is so ancient, it doesn't even conform to how you think an old boat looks, right? You know those pirate galleons, and you think about them having the wheel and the sails and stuff. It doesn't have any of that. It just had 2 sticks that they pushed and pulled to maneuver it around. So I asked questions about everything. And then, so I got a lot from them. We travelled out to Indonesia, and we wandered around Indonesia trying to find the old city there and trying to learn as much as we could about spice trading. And then I went and sat in the British Library for 3 months, and I read passenger manifests and journals of people who'd been on these boats and who'd sailed and what the conditions were like for them. And once I had all of that, I threw it all away, at least most of it, because what I wanted was the book to have that history through osmosis. I wanted it to feel like it was just the texture of the novel without feeling like a Wikipedia article on, well, this was proper rigging in 1629, and this was that, and this was that. There's other books that do that better than mine, other authors who will do it wildly better than I will ever do it. I wanted you just to feel that you were in that place, in that time. I wanted you to feel the grime on your skin and the sea spray, and I wanted you to feel the danger and the tension of it, but I didn't want to go into detail about the history of it. And that's why, I don't know if it's in the Spanish edition, but there's a note in the back of the English version which very specifically says, this is not a piece of historical fiction, please don't treat it as such.
Yeah, and the main character in The Devil Under the Water, who we said is the main character, is imprisoned in most of the novel, or during a big part of the novel. Were you tempted to take him out of the prison in the ship and do things from the very beginning, or was that the idea from the initial preparation?
No, he was always going to be in prison. The problem is, so it's my protagonists in Devil and Dark Water are based on Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And as I was saying earlier, I very much don't like Sherlock Holmes. The reason I don't like Sherlock Holmes very much is he's a tool, but he never changes through the course of Conan Doyle's novels. Like, if you think about Sherlock Holmes, generally people are thinking about the television adaptations of him. Mm-hmm. And they give him an emotional arc in those television adaptations. They make him more caring and more compassionate. But it doesn't really happen in the books. In the books, he starts off as a dickhead and he finishes as a dickhead. He's just an older dickhead. That's it. So And Watson, in the background of these novels, is living a life. So you'll get these stories, Sherlock Holmes stories, and they'll open with Watson saying something like, in that year, I had birthed my third child and started a practice on Harley Street, and my wife had died, but Sherlock Holmes was still living in Baker Street, smoking opium. I was like, he never changes, and Watson has this really interesting life. So it always felt to me that the focus was on the wrong character. That's for starters. And then, as the sort of novels progressed, and I was thinking about that partnership and what I was going to do with them, I realised that Conan Doyle, when he writes Sherlock Holmes, writes him as absolutely brilliant for 3 pages at the beginning of every Conan Doyle story, of every Sherlock Holmes story. There's a guy walking down the street. He's walking down the street outside Baker Street, and Sherlock Holmes looks out the window and tells you everything you could ever know about that character. Where he comes from, who his parents were, what he ate for breakfast, everything. And then the moment the mystery starts, those powers evaporate, and he's suddenly just spotting things on the wall that the police have missed. It's a very strange thing. So when writing my own Sherlock Holmes, what I wanted to do was make sure that he always had his powers. He always had that ability. It never deserted him in these crucial moments. He could always do it. The problem with doing that is that your book would be over in 7 pages. If a character can solve any mystery just by seeing everything, the book doesn't last. So that's why I locked him in prison. It's a very specific plot contrivance. Yeah. If I put him in prison, he can't solve the mystery in 7 pages, and it allows me to elevate Watson, who I always thought was the more interesting character anyway. So it was almost the first idea I had for it, that I was going to do that.
Mm-hmm. 7 Deaths is a kind of murder in a closed room novel, or not a closed room, but a closed area. And The Devil Underwater is a murder in a closed area, in a ship in this case. And there's also a murder in a closed room in the novel. Do you like this concept about the murder in a closed area? How can this help you to organize the structure of the novel?
Closed spaces are great. They limit the amount of suspects. If you're trying to do, which I am, the kind of Conan Doyle, Christie kind of setup where you've got a limited number of suspects. Actually, it's more Christie than Conan Doyle, but limited number of suspects, and you want the reader to play the game with you and to try and solve it. You've got to make it fair. And to do that, you've got to limit the number of suspects. You've got to have a kind of confined area. So, because that's the board to me. It's like a board game, and that is the board. So everyone can work out that person could have been there, that person could have been over there. You have got a compelling reason why characters aren't, just going off to Argentina or flying in. You need to keep them in a location. So plotting mysteries is just much easier if you keep them in one place. And then it has a secondary effect of tension and creating tension, because if you have a static location, and I mean in the sense of that they don't ever leave that location, you can build tension because they're trapped. They can't go anywhere, and if you've got a killer running around killing them, you can just keep escalating and ratcheting up. Whereas if they can just leave at any time, there is no real tension in it. The tension comes from whether someone will get caught or not. So there's a lot of benefits to having an isolated location, and it also lets me imbue it with character, which again is something you get. Fantasy novels, sci-fi novels do this a lot. If there's a sci-fi novel that's set on a ship, for example, a crew, generally the spaceship or the location will be a character in its own right, like the Enterprise or Babylon 5 or the Rocinante in The Expanse. They make these characters in the show. They give them personalities. And that's something I'm trying to do in both of these books. So Blackheath in 7 Deaths is a character. The Sardam in Devil is a character. They have traits, they have malevolence, they want something out of the story. You can't really do that if you have multiple locations because you couldn't spare the words.
Yeah. Actually, now that you mention kind of how you structure that, 7 Deaths has kind of really complex structure. Mm-hmm. It's easy in the initial phase when it's basically the detective going over again through the same day, looking the action from a different body. Mm. But there are many actions taking place, and I guess that planning that novel had to be really hard. How was the process of planning 7 Deaths? Because it's diabolical in the way it's built itself.
It's strange, isn't it? I don't remember the planning being terribly difficult because I give myself a lot of time to do it. So it took 3 months to plan that novel, and I planned every 2 minutes of every character's day in the house. So I knew exactly, all secondary, all primary characters, I knew exactly where everyone was and what they were doing, what they were thinking at all times. And that was just kind of fun. Like, it was an exercise that I'd have no other reason to do otherwise. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that quite a lot. And for that, I spent like 3 months basically wandering around with my head filled with this timeline, not really seeing the world because it was so internal, and I was so sort of dedicated and thinking about it. Like, why would that person be there? How do I put them there? It was a very elegant way of plotting a novel. It was only when I started writing it that I realized the short, like, because it's so mechanical, there isn't any room for improvisation, or if you have a good idea, you can't put it in because it derails the timeline completely. So it was a relatively easy book to plot and quite a difficult book to write. Whereas this was the opposite. Devil was the opposite. Devil also had a really rigid, it was very rigidly plotted. Like, I knew exactly where everyone was going. But I put room in that plan for improvisation, for sort of different ideas. And I let my characters lead it a little bit more. So that one was kind of almost weirdly harder to plot, but easier to write. And again, now I think with my third novel, it's just difficult to plot and difficult to write. So this is where my career is taking me.
Was there any lesson learned from Seven Deaths?
I never learn anything. I don't learn a damn thing. When I wrote Seven Deaths, I threw away, I think, about 40,000 words. So I overwrote it by about 40,000 words and threw them away. And at the time, I thought that was incredibly inefficient and that I'd made mistakes and I should have just been clearer on kind of what I was trying to do. And then when I wrote Devil, I ended up throwing away something like 140,000 words. I basically wrote the wrong book first and then had to toss it and start again. And what I've learned is actually, annoyingly, that's just the way I write. It's not a mistake. It's a feature, not a bug. There's a lot of a novel that I find, even with all the meticulous planning, there's a lot of the novel and a lot of the detail and a lot of the texture that I find by writing it, and I've got to write myself down just pits and dark holes and corners first to get to the interesting stuff. I've kind of got to get out of the way. So, no, I don't appear to be learning anything, which is sad for me but at this rate, my fourth novel will be 900,000 words long and I'll throw away 870,000 words of them. Actually, that's quite good fantasy novel length, isn't it? Come to think of it.
Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes, we got the detectives that goes through many of them novels. Have you ever thought on creating your own character that you can write several books using the same one?
I'll never write a series. So the problem with a series is that I don't know how authors do it. It's a skill set that I simply don't have. It's like there's the same thing as like authors who can write specifically in their genre and sort of obey the rules of it. It's just not something I know how to do. And my problem would be that I feel like when I write a book, I mine those characters out for every emotion and for all their past and for everything I could ever possibly say about them. I try and dig it all out and I try and dig right down into the heart of them. That I don't know how I'd bring any of these characters back. I don't know what else I would have to say about them. And that's usually my answer when people ask for sequels to either of these. And it does come up a lot. People want sequels to these books, which is nice. But I say, like, what would you have? Like, what do you think the book would be? You know all of their backstory at this point. You know all of their feelings towards everyone around them. You know how they solve mysteries. So all of that texture would go out of the book. All that would be left would be the mystery. That's all you'd have left. And I know for some people that's enough, but that's just actually not the books that I'm writing. It's that they're always mystery plus other elements. So, and that's what keeps me entertained. If I spoke elsewhere that I find writing incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult to the point of unenjoyable. Sitting down at your computer for 8 hours a day is not an enjoyable task when there's an entire world out there that you could be exploring. And the only reason I can do that is because I'm creating new worlds all the time, that I'm sitting down and writing something that I find entertaining. Whether that's a new character or a cliffhanger or something unique. That's what I get excited by. if I was to write a sequel, I wouldn't be able to sit down and do that. Just wouldn't be possible.
In Seven Deaths, we know from the very beginning, well, the title says itself, who is being murdered.
And that's a massive spoiler, I should have thought about that.
Spoiler itself. But in Devil and Water, things are unveiled as you read the book. It's not like Seven Deaths, but you know everything from the beginning.
Well, you know there's a devil, and you know there's some dark water. So you've got that.
That's a spoiler as well. In which one did you enjoy? You as a reader, which one do you enjoy more? Like, you want to know what happens from the beginning and then solve the case, or you want the structure of the Devil Underwater, where things are going as you read?
It's a mood thing for me, very much. Like yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. Like, I find it, I don't know if this is everybody, but I don't read any specific genres. So I tend to I read quite a lot of literary fiction. Then I will read a bit of crime, and then I won't read anything for a few months, and I'll hop over to something else. And it is very mood-based, so there are days when I just want to solve a mystery and get stuck in and try and work it out for myself and puzzle it out. But almost never when I'm writing. Like, I almost don't read when I'm writing, because it's too easy for me to inadvertently assimilate somebody else's voice. And I definitely don't read in my genre, so I would never read another crime novel while I'm writing a crime novel, because I might nick their ideas, or inadvertently nick their ideas, and I definitely don't want to be doing that. Or somebody might do it better, or somebody might do it worse, whatever it is. So in terms of my mysteries, when I come to them, I think I'm more on the side of I'd like to solve it. I would like to be intellectually engaged with the mystery. But then just sometimes, it's beautiful. Like a Raymond Chandler, you can't really solve a Raymond Chandler. They're not really set up for that. They're just adventures. You just want to hang out with this cool dude who's doing cool things. That's the buzz I get out of those books. So it's very much a mood thing.
Devil and Underwater, as we said, has been a great success in terms of critics and public and sales and everything else. But Seven Deaths was also a great success. That was your first novel. At what point
do I retire? Tomorrow.
At what point, since the book was released, at what point you said, oh, this is becoming something? This is like really going, it's not just another book in the shelves, it's something bigger. It's becoming something.
I'll let you know when it happens. I am constantly convinced my career is going to collapse tomorrow. I live in fear of it, because it's such an uncertain job. It's such a strange job. It's strange. Okay, so there's like an economic certainty to it, right? That's very odd. This is a bit inside baseball, but as an author, it's not that you get a monthly wage or anything like that. You get your royalties. Somebody pays you in advance, and once you've paid off your advance, you start getting royalties. The royalties come every quarter, every 3 months. And you never know what that check is going to be till it turns up. It's really hard to make life decisions when you don't know what your wage is going to be at any given time. So these books have been very good for me, and they've given me a lot of stuff. But I don't ever count on it, because I'm like, well, these sales could go downhill tomorrow, and then suddenly we don't have that money, and we can't do this and we can't do that. So there's always that slightly negative feeling about books, not in the sense of I hate doing this, but in the sense of if this all collapses tomorrow, I've got to make sure I'm stable today. So I don't think I've ever sat down to enjoy it, or just be like, oh, these are great successes. I'm just keep writing them so your career doesn't tank. That's the way I think about it.
Yeah. Even though we have said that these books includes fantasy, the main reason of the books is the mystery plot behind it. But what the readers said to you as a feedback when they read those books and they find these science fiction fantasy elements in them, do they feel like, oh, this is not a truly mystery book? Are they okay with that?
Yeah.
What's the feedback you receive from them?
It's a strange thing. So fantasy, sci-fi, as you can imagine with these novels, I will end up doing every genre's festival at some point. So I'll go from a historical fiction festival to a sci-fi fantasy festival, and then I'll be at a crime festival the week after, and the horror festival after that. What I've noticed is that the sci-fi fantasy crowd are much more open to crime. They're much more open to other genres being in their genre, right? They're quite happy for that to happen. I don't know whether that's something about those genres that opens the doors to that. Horror fans fucking hate it. They just hate it, and it pisses them off if you're doing anything that's not straight up horror. And then crime fans, I don't know if this is true everywhere, but crime fans are usually a little bit older, and they are... I went to a festival the other week. This was last month. I went to a festival, and a little old lady, I'd say 70-something, came up to me, very sweet, just like hobbled up to me, and she's like, I read your book. And I'm like, oh yeah. And she's like, I wanted to throw it across the room. I was like, oh, why? And she was like, I cannot abide fantasy. And she was talking about Devil in the Dark Water. I was like, there's no fantasy in Devil in the Dark Water, really. Like, I guess there's like horror and the occult and stuff. And I tried to drill down into what this was. And she's like, oh, well, I mean, you've got ghosts, haven't you? There's no ghosts. And I'm like, oh my God, if that's your fantasy, you're going to be in real trouble. So it sort of delineates down into the different genres, like their expectations of what they want from the book. So I would say at the top are horror, they don't want anything else. Then beneath them is crime, they're generally quite like steadfast. They're slightly open to things. And then sci-fi fantasy, and I haven't written a romance yet, so who knows what I'll find out with romance authors.
Yeah. Usually those charts are filled with mystery books.
Right.
Thriller, mystery, detective. What makes that genre very attractive for readers, do you think?
I don't know. I generally don't know. I think there's boring answers here. There's the answer that, like, there's a certainty to mystery novels, which people like. People do like, and there's usually a formula to them as well, which we've got to be open about. The charts are filled with thrillers and mysteries, but they're usually by the authors who've written 300 of them. And you get the same characters and you get the situations, and readers like coming back to those characters. They like finding them every Christmas or every May or whenever they come out, and knowing there's going to be a new, whoever it is, new in ranking with the same sorts of characters. And there's an ease and a comfort to that, which reading always should offer to you. So I think it's part of that. And then I just think the other bit of it is just that the world is uncertain and terrible at the moment, and there's a lot of stuff to worry about. There's almost nothing to worry about in a mystery novel. Someone will die, but that's the first thing that happens. So if you can get over that, you'll be all right. And then eventually someone will catch them. And that's quite nice to know, right? Like,
it's like a relief.
Yeah, it is. It's like, but you go in knowing it's, okay, that's great. That's going to, and then you're kind of curious about how it will happen, but you don't have to, usually the novels don't ask too much of you. They're not trying. They're not difficult. And that's what I hear a lot from people, is that they don't want to read my novels because they're worried that they're asked too much, and I just want to relax at night. I just want to sit in front of Netflix. And you have to be honest and be like, yeah, these novels do ask things of you. They do want more engagement of you than a typical mystery novel, because that's the way I write, and that's what I as a reader want. So I think it's probably a combination of that, all those things I just said in that overlong answer.
You've mentioned Netflix. And 7 Deaths is in process of becoming a TV series, I think.
Yep.
While is Devil Underwater also been option? I see that more as a film.
Do you?
Yeah.
That's interesting, because it's getting made as a series.
Okay.
So you're going to be... It's very sad.
I will like it as well.
I will not see it. I have no interest.
Absolutely. How is that going with Netflix? What is your level of involvement in that?
So, for 7 Deaths, my level of involvement was quite slight, but it appears to be growing. I can't really say much about that at the moment. There's been a lot of delays to 7 Deaths, and there's been a few problems behind the scenes with it, getting onto the screen, because it's an incredibly complicated story, and it asks a lot of the production team and the writers who are going to put it on screen. So when I sold the rights to it before it was ever published in the UK. So it was sold 2 months before we published it. And at that time, I didn't know how television worked. I assumed that I'd sell it and then it would be on television in a year's time or something. So I washed my hands of it and didn't want anything to do with it. And I was like, I'll let people who know what they're doing take care of that. And now I know how television works. And that's, where are we, like 3-4 years later or something? And it's not really any further along. So that one's kind of stuck. So we're going to take that back to the drawing board now and get it moving. Devil, for whatever reason, was optioned much later, but is moving much more quickly. The pilot script for Devil is brilliant. I read it, it's absolutely wonderful. It changes some stuff, it brings a lot of backstory in, but it's just a brilliant, if we can get it on the way it is, it'd be a brilliant piece of television. But I'm a lot more involved with that one.
Also Netflix behind that one?
At the moment, it's looking like Netflix or BBC.
In a way, Seven Deaths, in the way it is written, it makes sense as a series, to be honest. Like 7 deaths, 7 bodies, 7 chapters, 7 episodes.
It does, but the problem with that is that there's not often... It's going to be on Netflix. There's a usual episode count. You don't have to obey it, but the usual episode count. Things don't break down as nicely as you'd want. Like in terms of you just have that character, you kind of take the surprise out of it. You're going to take the tension out of it. You actually want certain events to be more foregrounded, and it works better in a book. So, for example, in Seven Deaths, there is a character called Charles Dance, who is an older man. He moves quite slowly through the book, and a lot of what he does is very internal. It would be very boring on television to have that character, and to translate him is a very tricky thing. So his episode would not be a good episode. So what you need to do then is obviously mess around with that a little bit and have other people coming and going and kind of like dilute his chapter out a little bit. So it's just little things like that keep cropping up that's making it difficult for the writers.
It's been a year now since Devil and Dark Water was published in English and Spanish as well. What's coming next?
Well, I'm writing my 3rd novel now, which I'm due to deliver to my UK publisher in March. It will definitely not be delivered to my UK publisher in March. I hope they're not watching this, because that will be the first I hear of it. I'm just working on that, and then I've got some television stuff that I'm working on. So I've got some scripts and bits and bobs for original stuff for TV that I'm working on, which would be really fun. So hopefully a lot. I think I've said, again, I say this quite a lot. The problem with being an author is that you have all the ideas in the world and not enough time. Because unless you're a sort of James Patterson who can get in, loads of other writers to come and help you, you are responsible for your output. It's just me, it's on me. So every idea I've got, I'm the one who's going to go and write it. If it's a novel, that's going to be 2 years of my time. If it's a script, it's going to be 3 weeks of my time. If it goes through to television, it's going to be however long that takes. So what I'm trying to do is balance things up, write books, but also keep scripts. So I've got that outlet of being able to tell a story in a lot shorter amount of time and see it finished. Because obviously when you start a new book, you're starting a blank page and knowing it will not be finished for 2.5 years. And that can be quite demoralizing after 7 months or something. But yeah, hopefully there's a lot more coming.
In a way, the life of a successful writer changed very much since you wrote your first novel, when no one knew about you at that moment. And now that you got into TV, into books, into series, into everything else, how busy is your life at the moment?
Really, well, what happened to me, and I'm very grateful, is that you spend ages hammering on that door. Like, you want to write a novel, you want to become an author. I was a journalist before this, so I was living a very nice life, but you're hammering on that door trying to be an author. And then you step through it, and what it felt like was I stepped through that door, and then everyone flung every other door open at the same time, like all of them, like 200 doors, and then you walk through all of those doors simultaneously. And that's what it feels like at the moment. It's trying to walk through 200 doors and do them all well. And it's wonderful. It's just absolutely brilliant. It's changed our lives completely, but at the same time, I don't get a lot of sleep. So,
before becoming a writer, you were a journalist. And you were a technology journalist?
Travel
as well. Both?
Yeah, and lifestyle. I was freelance, so I would take any piece that anyone paid me to do. Yeah. I wrote about drums once. I've never drummed in my entire life, and I wrote a very compelling review of a set of drums.
In a way, in these 2 books, there's a bit of, that travel journal is quite in the devil.
It's quite in Seven Deaths as well. Travel journalism is very descriptive. It's a very emotive thing. If you're a good travel journalist, what you're trying to do is carry your reader to the place that you've been to, and you want to try and convey your experience of being there as much as possible. Again, you want them to smell the air, you want them to feel the sand under their feet.
Or meeting the emotions. Or
exactly.
Place where you are.
Yeah, and have that feeling, that sense of being there. So it's very descriptive language, but it can't be too descriptive because that feels crass. So I learned that in travel magazines, and it is built into the way I write. Like, I really, in both these books, I want the reader to feel like they're there in that space. I want them to feel threatened if the character is threatened. I want them to generally have a sense of being in that body at that time. So that travel journalism kind of carries through to both of them. Not so much the tech journalism. That's not really in them too much.
Also, it has to be really different to talk about the emotions of being on a 5-star hotel compared to your British mansion in 1927.
Yeah.
7 Deaths.
I guess there's a part of, like, the emotion is the bit of the books that I'm bad at. So I'm just not naturally an emotional person. I don't have emotional highs. I don't have emotional lows, which must be a pleasure for my wife. But I found when I came to Seven Deaths, writing emotion was quite difficult because I'd never had to do it before. I'd never had to practice. So when this went through to my editor at Bloomsbury in the UK, the only notes that she sent back were, what is this character feeling at this moment? What is this character feeling at this moment? How does this character feel? So that's what the big edit was there. And then when I moved on to Devil, I was very aware of that, and I was trying to foreground the emotions a bit more and try and make sure these characters, had hearts and were worried about things and had fears, because it is quite hard to sort of retroactively fit in after the fact.
I'm almost half all my questions done, but I would like to open the time for questions for the audience, if there's anything. Okay, let's go. There's a micro somewhere.
Look, guys, I expect you all to ask a question, all right? I've been up here, I'm doing my job. I've been up here for 40 minutes.
There's one question here, the front.
Have you heard the audiobooks version of your books? What do you think about them?
I have not, because I hate my books. When you finish anything that you've been writing and working on for 2.5 years, I cannot stand to go back to it. I will never watch the TV adaptations of them. I will never read them again or allow someone to read them. I generally don't do readings of my books at events because I hate reading them again. So no, I've not listened to the audiobooks, but I've heard from a lot of other people that the narrators are just brilliant. Genuinely bring something new to the story and different texture to it, but I couldn't listen to them. Otherwise, I'd have to club myself to death with a book.
That has to be an issue for you, not do readings in British events.
No, I think
because something that is very common in the British events is that the writer reads a chapter, an episode, reads something from the book.
Yeah, it's true. No, I think word's gone around now that I don't do it because nobody asks me anymore. I think 'cause I did it with such a glower on my face. Because the other thing about it is all I can see is the things that I should have done and the mistakes that I made, or I read the line that was there before the final edit and not the line that's actually there. It's ridiculous. So no, I don't do it anymore.
Yeah, there's another question there.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk. I have a question for you. How important is translation for you? And do you keep track of the languages into which your books are translated?
Translation's exceptionally important to me because I don't speak any other languages. So I want as many people to read my books as possibly can. But again, I don't know. I have got, in my contracts, usually I have to sign off on the translation, which is ridiculous. I don't know. So you trust your partners, you trust your publishers in foreign countries and know that they're doing the best job they can and they know what they're about. The bit of it I really love is that usually the translator, my books are usually filled with idioms, And the translator will usually send me a big long list of questions, just before it goes, and they will always be about idioms. They will always be about my biographical note at the front, where I'm like, it's a little in-joke or something. Those always seem to baffle my translators. They never get those. So that's usually my only input. The rest of it, I just assume they've done a brilliant job and people are enjoying them. Because, I know authors actually get really hung up on it, and I just don't know how they've got the time or the energy. What was there? There was a second part to the question, wasn't there, I think? Oh, keeping track of. Yeah. I get sent a copy of the book in every language into which it's translated, and I've got those on my bookshelf at home. So we're on 38 for Seven Deaths and 24 for Devil at the moment.
How big is your bookshelf?
Sorry?
How big is your bookshelf?
Oh my! Yeah, it's huge. It's a very, very big bookshelf. It's bowing under the weight, but it's a really nice thing. We talked about feeling a sense of pride and success and stuff, and actually, that's probably when you see it in all these different languages with all these different covers, and you see all this work that all these people have put into your novel who you're never going to meet. That's thrilling. That's something else, because it feels like a very solitary profession. But when you look at those books, you realise that it's not. There's like hundreds of people involved in the production of these books. It's wonderful.
Hi.
Hi.
That was a bit loud. So this is slightly different, but whenever I read a mystery novel, I'm kind of baffled by how it's possible for someone to come up with something that I find so mysterious. I can't predict what will happen, and then suddenly it happens, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that happened. How did someone come up with that? So how do you come up with a mystery that remains mysterious, if that makes sense? That's actually thrilling and unexpected, and because it baffles me that it's possible to create it.
I think the difference is, for readers, it sometimes feels like a book just turns up the way it turns up, and it's like from start to finish. And that's not the case. Like, what turns up is a raggedy mess, and then you edit it 700 times. So you give yourself a chance to add in those bits and take things out that aren't working. And my editing process is incredibly severe. So as I talked about throwing words away, I have no compunction, because I used to be a journalist. I don't worry about throwing words away. I don't worry about throwing away plot points or characters that aren't working. Seven Deaths initially had a completely different ending and a completely extra character, and I got rid of them because they weren't working. So that sense of keeping it mysterious and making sure there's enough cliffhangers and making sure that it's a satisfying mystery, it's two things. One, you plot it out. I plot it out meticulously to start off with. And then when I write it, I just make sure that I've got one eye on my reader while I'm doing it. And I'm always trying to think about what you are thinking at that point, because I read all the Sherlock Holmes, I read all the Agatha Christie. So I try to somehow read it outside of myself and be like, at this point, what would I be guessing? At this point, where is my eye? And then you can play with that. That's so much fun. You can be like, well, I'd be thinking it was this person. So I'm like, okay, well, let's lean into that. Let's really throw everything at them and make them feel dead clever. And then 2 chapters later, we can take the rug out from underneath them. So it's like kind of a dual identity, sociopath kind of thing. Yeah.
Thanks. You mentioned that doors have opened and you're moving into working in TV and so forth. And given the way that, especially the streaming services, have given us long-form TV that you could reasonably describe as novelistic, could you see a time in the future where you would lean that way entirely? Or is there something about prose fiction that is an itch you couldn't scratch in the arena of TV?
Yeah, exactly. So I like the TV stuff because it gives me a break from novels. I always compare it to sort of like writing novels is like eating Michelin-starred food all the time. Like, it's pretty great, but you don't want it for every meal. TV is a bit more sort of like down and dirty pasta on the hob. Like it can be whatever you want. I like the idea that I tell my story in 3 weeks and it's over and I get to be done with it and send it off to someone. And TV is just more collaborative. There's always people you can talk to and there's always people who have feedback, and I'm open to that. I like that. Again, I came from a journalistic background. I'm used to having editors around me and things like that. So they just feel to me, even though it's writing, it's two completely different forms of writing. And it's nice to kind of have the difference and sort of like refresh myself, because I find books exhausting. Like I find it hard process. You throw so much of yourself into it. It's hard and it's difficult, and you do it for 2 years. Being able to be like, and me and my wife always talk about finish a book and then have a break and maybe don't write for 3 months. It's just never worked out that way, and it never will work out that way. And now that I've accepted that, my break is writing scripts instead. That's how I refresh myself, and that's how I energize myself now. And I get to do something completely different in TV, and that I couldn't do in prose and vice versa. I use them for different sorts of stories. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
We still have time for another question.
Come on. Who's going to be the last question?
Don't be shy.
You get a big high five from me. Yeah. Otherwise, I have to ask myself a question. It'd be really embarrassing. There he is.
There's one.
Well, I will just need translation, but... So, about sci-fi authors, you were talking about sci-fi authors. Have you read any Spanish or Catalan authors? And I'm thinking about Albert Sánchez Piñol, La pell freda, Cold Skin. I don't know if you've read it or if you've seen the movie, to know what you can expect from a movie, having read the film. Hello, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. Is it? Yes. Can you hear me? Hello. Can you hear me? Channel 2. Well, hello. 1, 2, 3. Okay. He was asking about have you read any Catalan or Spanish sci-fi authors, and particularly he was asking about Albert Sánchez Piñol. He's a Catalan author, and he's got this bestseller La pell freda, which is the cold skin, which been also it's been transferred to a movie. The movie's been made of it, so maybe he was wondering whether you've read the book or seen the movie, maybe to see what can you expect of a movie based on a book.
Sorry, no, I haven't. As I say, I'm only just now getting into sci-fi, but it turns out sci-fi books are generally quite long. There's usually 10 of them, and it takes. I've got 3 hours of spare time a week, so I'm getting through them very slowly. But no, sorry, I've not been able to. Thank you very much, translator.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're almost there. It's almost 5 o'clock now. I think we can now finish. Just to say thank you for coming, and I can't recommend enough these 2 books. I think you're going to find an exciting story in both of them. Very different one to each other, but both of them really compelling and really exciting and engaging. And you can't stop reading until the very end. And I have to congratulate you for that.
Thank you very much. And when I said I hated them, that doesn't mean you'll hate them. Just so. That is not a record. Don't go on Amazon.
I'm really looking forward for the day that you are invited for your premiere. Because you're going to need to watch an episode based on your books, which is something you hate.
At least I'd be having a big sleep. That's what I'll be doing.
That's a good thing. As I said, thank you for flying down from England. And thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
And just to say...
And thank you to Borja as well. Yeah. Good questions. Thank you very much.
Just some admin stuff saying Stuart is going to be signing books outside from now on.
Yes.
I think that way or that way, I don't know where. But wherever books are signed, they're going to be signed by Stuart. So thank you.
Thank you.